Forward-facing sonar is not the executioner of fishing, it's the coroner. Livescope didn't actually kill the sport, but what it has done is made very clear to us that the ways in which some of us have defined fishing, I think have been dead for a very long time. Now, what the heck does that even mean? My name's Tyler, and this is a very important episode. Let's talk about it.
Another giant, another giant. Look at that, y'all.
I can't believe what I just caught.
Yes!
Now, this video, as the title and thumbnail suggest, is going to be a discussion on the topic of forward-facing sonar and its effect on the activity of bass fishing. Now, you'll probably notice I didn't call it the sport of bass fishing, and I'll give my reason why here in a bit. I also titled the video the way I did because I believe I'm in a very unique situation to give a even-keeled, relatively emotionless response to the topic of forward-facing sonar. Not to say that other videos that guys make on YouTube or Facebook are wrong about this topic, but I'm gonna go into why I humbly believe my opinion on this topic holds quite a bit of water because of what I've seen and who I hang out with across the fishing industry. Later on in this video, I'm gonna discuss some commonly held beliefs about forward-facing sonar that I see all the time on social media in comment sections that I think need to be shut down once and for all. And to finish the video, I'm gonna give some actual solutions to the forward-facing sonar problem to both tournament organizations, companies in the fishing industry, and you as an individual angler, whether you love Livescope or you hate it, because I'm sick of seeing the constant complaining and a lack of solution. And because this episode is gonna be absolutely jam-packed, I wanna make sure that everything I wrote down in this script, because this topic is so important, and I know that opinions and emotions can run wild with this thing, I wanna make sure everything that I wrote down gets across to you guys on camera, so hopefully the laptop is not a distraction. Now, what is forward-facing sonar? Well, if you don't know, consider yourself lucky, but for the sake of this video, you kind of have to know. FFS, or Livescope, or scoping, as I wanna call it the rest of this video, is by far the greatest leap in fish finder technology in the history of fishing, because with it you can actually see fish react live to your lures underwater, something that wasn't even possible until a few years ago. Now, the woods are full of people that are upset about this advancement in technology, and they make it clear in the comments on social media by saying things about Livescope like, it's cheating, it's unfair to the fish, it's ruining the sport, it's like spotlighting deer, and a slew of other pejorative descriptions. And besides the spotlighting deer comparison, which is laughably inaccurate, if you've actually seen a deer in a spotlight, they are nothing similar to each other. But the rest of them actually might hold some water, and you might agree with those terms, but the extent to which you agree with those terms depends fully on your why, which is the first thing I want to talk about in this video. I believe that Livescope has exposed the many reasons why anglers love going fishing, when I think for the longest time, especially pre-social media, we believed that every other angler thought the way we did, and that's not quite true. And I think that's a huge aspect, a huge part of the discussion when it comes to forward-facing sonar. So let's dive in. Take watching football, for example. Some people watch because they played the sport at some level. Some watch because they just enjoy good athletic competition. And some people watch simply for the extracurriculars like Taylor Swift in the stands or the commercials during halftime at the Super Bowl. And that last group possibly has never touched a football in their entire life. And so you can't lump all three of those categories of viewers into one football watching demographic, because they are far different. They have different whys. And the same goes for the whys of fishing. Some people fish for pure competition. The more and the bigger fish they catch, the more money they win. And so they're gonna take, for the most part, every advantage they can to understand their lakes better, find more fish, and therefore catch more fish and make more money to provide for their family. So that's category one. Some people like the competition. Maybe they fish some small tournaments, but really they just enjoy being out there on the water, making memories, catching fish with friends and family. And so technology like Livescope, forward facing, really helps them do that, helps them make more memories and catch more fish. And lastly, some anglers fish for the feeling and the uncertainty of the chase, the process, the unknown. They never know how or where their next bite will come from. And to be honest, they prefer it that way. And it really seems to me that the usage of forward-facing sonar has made clear for the first time in the history of fishing the distinction between those groups of anglers. Because I'll admit, even though we had crazy advancements from paper sonar to color to side scan to 360 and now Livescope, the jump from what we had to forward facing was a ginormous jump, and I'm not going to deny that. And for some anglers, the usage of that technology absolutely ruins the experience they have out there on the water, and I can understand that. But also on the flip side, for a different group of anglers, using forward-facing sonar has done nothing but increase their level of enjoyment for the activity, and if they're skilled with it and they're in competitions, the amount of money and success they can gain because of that technology. And the biggest problem on top of all of this, in my opinion, is that because social media is so widely used by basically every group of those anglers' wives, you can go on a post and you can make a comment and say, this is the group that I'm in and all the other groups are wrong. And so I'm not gonna turn the comment section off on this video, but I wanna encourage you guys to watch the whole thing before you comment your opinion on forward-facing sonar, or just don't waste your time at all. I'm not saying don't give your opinion, but I see every day the division that is caused by forward-facing sonar on social media, and I want my comment section to consist of none of that. So please think before you comment on this topic. Now, earlier in this video, I said that fishing was not a sport in my opinion, and I believe that's the case because I think the majority of anglers across the planet don't view it as a sport. They view it as a relaxing pastime, a fun activity that, for the most part, forward-facing sonar, live scoping around, would actually hurt your enjoyment of that activity, which I can totally understand. But on the flip side, millions of anglers do see fishing as a competition, as a sport, and maybe they aspire to compete on the pro level one day, the Bassmasters, the MLFs of the world. And for a long time, I think the anglers in those groups believed they were part of the same exact group. They all had the same exact why, but I think we're seeing, especially based on pros' opinions on forward-facing and in comment sections, like I mentioned, there are so many whys even within the realm of fishing competition. But there's still one more thing that I think really ties into the why factor, and it's that I believe there's always been a disconnect between the average fishing fan and the professional angler, but it's just becoming more and more obvious with the usage of forward-facing sonar, multiple transducers, multiple screens. It's becoming pretty clear. Let me explain what the disconnect is. There is something wired in the professional angler, at least the dominant ones on tour, that is anti the Category 3 mentality we talked about earlier. So let me refresh your memory. Category 3 fans, they love to see big fish, weighed in on stage or on score tracker, but they love the idea of the mystery behind seeing those big fish, behind how they were caught. And so they believe that the pro angler that caught that fish, or the YouTuber that caught that fish, fill in the blank with the type of person they're watching or interacting with on social media, they think that that person fishes just like them and thinks just like them. But I'm here to tell you that for the most part, the pro anglers have never been a part of the Category 3 of fishing whys. At least on the water in competition, professional anglers have one main focus, and that is to catch the biggest fish and the most fish by any means necessary to beat the pants off their competitors, to make more money and provide for their families. That's what pro fishing truly is all about. Now, there are a few detractors even among the professional fishing ranks, and those are usually older guys who maybe dominated back in the day in the sport, and because of the youth wave that's coming into pro bass fishing, or really into tournament bass fishing as a whole, the tournaments they used to do well in, they are no longer doing well because they didn't adopt to the changes in technology. And so because of this, a lot of them, not all of them, guys like Alton Jones Sr., one of the oldest guys on the professional tours, he adjusted to technology and he's doing just fine. But for a lot of other pros who are older, they didn't. And so they have joined the anti-forward-facing sonar crowd, the biggest of which being Mr. Randy Blockett. And while there are so many different opinions as to why guys don't like forward-facing sonar, I'm going to discuss the main two talking points that I hear about the anti-FFS crowd, and that is one, that anybody with scope can do that, aka it's easy, and two, that using forward-facing is cheating because I had to learn the hard way. And so I want to talk about the first or the second of those two being the it's cheating because I had to do it the hard way. And let me just say that that is a wild way of thinking. No one in life, as human civilization gets more and more advanced, has it harder than their ancestors. I hate the statement, I had to do it the hard way. Like, yeah, you did, but I don't. Nowadays, from a super young age, anglers from around the world can now study topographic maps on their phone. They can search endlessly on YouTube for whatever technique they want to learn on whatever lake or pond they want to learn it on. I mean, it can be super specific. And I'm just counting both main tours here. Anglers can watch 576 hours of live pro tournament coverage a year if they want to. That is so much information that anglers from the youngest age possible, because of technology, can consume to make themselves a better angler. And I don't think people making the comment of, well, it's cheating because I had to learn the hard way, I don't think they are considering this when they make those comments about Livescope. And I saw some pro angler make a post that said something to the extent of 30 years of experience down the drain because of all these young kids in scope. They don't have to learn these lakes anymore. But to be honest, he's not thinking about the rest of the technology, because it's the mapping, it's the YouTube videos, it's the coverage. All of that technological advancement happened before Livescope even existed, but now because these young anglers have a supreme understanding of bodies of water and fish behavior, and they've adopted technology, they are combining the two together and becoming unstoppable even on the pro fishing ranks. And the second point I want to discuss that I see so often on social media is that using forward-facing sonar and being a good live scoper, seeing a blob out there, casting your lure, and catching that fish is easy to do. And my gosh, is that wrong. Now, for some species like crappie, walleye, muskie, and for sure unpressured smallmouth bass, Livescope does make catching a lot easier and for sure locating. But for the vast majority of situations in which you actually scope a bass, you are seeing the blob on the screen and you are casting to that fish, it takes an immense amount of knowledge and skill to understand why that fish is in the location that you are fishing and catching that fish on your screen. Being a dominant scoper, catching fish by looking at them, is nowhere an easy task. And if you believe that, you're wrong. I'm sorry. I promise what I'm about to say comes from a place of confidence, not cockiness, and that is that I know more than you do because I've more than likely seen more than you have. I have traveled the country over the past 7, 8, 9 years. I'm talking the actual full country from California to New York to South Florida, seeing the way fish react to my lures on Livescope. And I've traveled the country with the current #2 angler on the planet, Alton Jones Jr., who I believe is one of the best live scopers on planet Earth. And I have seen every situation in which you can utilize forward-facing sonar to catch more bass on the water. And let me tell you, they are not all easy and they are not all effective. Forward-facing is just another tool to catch fish. And I've seen that time and time again. And so you can hold whatever opinion you want. But if you want to think that live scoping, especially for the majority of big tournament lakes out there, big pressured bodies of water, if you think that's easy, you are wrong and you haven't tried it. And I want to touch real quick on the different usages of forward-facing sonar that I've seen across the country. Sometimes you're using it to understand bottom composition. Sometimes you're looking at structure to actually see fish on the structure. And occasionally you're just scanning around in open water, as they say, looking for pelagic bass that are moving around in the water column. And sometimes you're wasting your time, actually most of the time, wasting your time casting at fish that aren't even bass. Don't ask me how I know. And if you're someone that says that forward-facing sonar is just not the sportsman's way, it doesn't feel right, doesn't look right, you can hold that opinion, but I think for the most part, that couldn't be further from the truth. For example, what Jacob Wheeler and Alton Jones Jr. did at the Santee Cooper event using forward-facing sonar this year, in my opinion, was far more challenging and sportsmanlike than what everybody else in the top 10 did. And so what they were doing is they were using their screen, their forward-facing, their live scope, to find completely submerged structure that honestly, Alton told me would hardly even show up on side scan or down scan as they're looking for structure. It was only forward-facing that showed them that underwater structure, mainly being laydowns in small stumps. And by utilizing their screens, they were able to cast over and over and over again precisely to underwater structure with their jig head minnows to either catch a fish that they couldn't see on those stumps, and if they wouldn't catch one, they would just move along to the next piece of underwater structure. That is the exact same. I don't care what anybody says. It's the exact same as taking your flipping jig in 65-pound braid and flipping over and over again to a tree that you see in the water that has branches over it, maybe some underhangs, and you want to make 4 or 5 casts at that area. And if you don't catch one, you'll move on to the next tree to flip. They are doing the exact same thing, but it's different in that they're using their screens and their jig head minnows to catch those fish and not their eyes and a flipping jig. And let me just say that doing that is extremely difficult. Dean Rojas, who fished second in the tournament, had a great event. He was throwing a wacky rig on the bank. What monkey among us couldn't do that with our eyes closed? That's easy fishing. And if it really is so easy to catch bass using forward facing, and there's fantastic good money to be made in being good with it, why haven't you? If you don't like forward facing sonar and you say it's easy to do, it makes me think that you actually haven't tried, because for the most part, I'm beating a dead horse here, it's not easy. And one last point that I want to make before I get to some rapid fire debunkings of commonly held beliefs is that social media, to be honest, is just as big of a problem as Livescope is. If catching 15 pounds for your best 5 on your local lake was considered a really good day for decades, and now guys, because of Livescope, are catching 20-pound bags, for example, your 15 pounds didn't become any less good. And maybe from a competitive standpoint, you're not doing as well in tournaments, but if you are just fishing for fun, the activity, the sport, whatever it is, and now you are seeing bigger and more bass being caught by other guys because of Livescope, and that's making you upset, take this as a challenge to maybe reconsider why you are fishing. Don't let someone else's success ruin your enjoyment of an activity like fishing. I don't necessarily think in this situation, Livescope's the problem, it's social media in comparison. All right, rapid fire debunking round of commonly held forward-facing sonar myths. First, you can just intentionally hook or snag a bass on Livescope. Trust me. I have reeled my Alabama rigs, my jerkbaits, my swim jig with no weed guard on it through hundreds of blobs on my screen, and I have yet to foul hook one fish. I have actually foul hooked more fish on crankbaits, jerkbaits, and treble hook topwaters in the past month than I have on forward facing intentionally the entirety of my usage of it. I mean, I've used it for like 5-6 years now. I have never foul hooked one. I'm not saying it's impossible, and you do see it on camera sometimes, but the fact that guys are intentionally snagging bass, they must be way better at it than I am, because I can't even snag a carp or a gar. The second one being that using forward facing takes no skill. Again, with very few exceptions like unpressured smallmouth during certain seasons, it takes a lot of skill to chase down those fish and get them to eat. The truth of the matter is that no bass is hungry all the time, and the vast majority of the time that I make a good cast at a fish, it does not eat my lure, and that's when I make a good cast, an accurate cast, when the fish is moving and I kind of meet that fish on its path. I scan my deucer and cast that way. I make a fantastic cast. The majority of the time, those fish don't even eat, and I guarantee you, if you are a Livescoper as well, you understand where I'm coming from. And if you think they're gonna eat every time, just try it. Please. Okay, number 3, it's not sportsmanlike. I discussed this, and my rebuttal to that, well, neither is bed fishing, and yet nobody raised a stink, I guess besides Randy Blockett, to be honest, to a large degree like they do about this. And so I have a feeling the same guys who comment that it's not sportsmanlike are probably the same guys that hate pop country, and they also hate deer hunting over corn. Well, guess what? Deer hunting over corn is still hunting, and pop country is still country music. It just might not be the kind of hunting and the kind of music that you like. But somebody likes it, and so it's for somebody, it just might not be for you. That's not your why. Number 4, you can just drop your trolling motor anywhere, pan around, and you'll find fish to catch. And my rebuttal to that is, okay, go try it for yourself. Turn your brain off, the part of your brain that understands bass behavior, and just go scope around. And I'm telling you, without applying bass knowledge to your scoping, you're not gonna catch much. That's why Wheeler, Dustin Connell, Alton Jr., Dakota Ebert, a lot of guys I could name are at the top of the sport competitively right now, because they have a supreme understanding of bass behavior and movements, and are also proficient at forward-facing sonar. It doesn't take somebody long who understands bass behavior to become a fantastic angler when they add forward-facing sonar into the mix. Number 5 is that pro anglers shouldn't need any fish finders to catch fish. If they're the best in the world, we should take all their fish finders away besides maybe water temperature and a flasher. And you're decades late. If that's your complaint on social media, you're decades late to that. Every type of angler has been using technology for a long time. It's a moot point. And number 6 is that forward-facing sonar is boring to watch. And to be honest, I can kind of get behind this sentiment. But you know what's also boring to watch? Bed fishing, and dragging a Carolina rig, and fishing a drop shot, and a shaky head, and a Ned rig, and a wacky rig, and for the most part, reeling a crankbait. The only truly fun fishing to watch is flipping and skipping and topwater, and maybe a swim jig up shallow in shallow grass. I think the real problem here is that forward-facing sonar has shown us that the jig head minnow, the shaking the minnow technique, the Demiki rig, is the best lure out there to catch bass in the water column and even sitting on structure across the country for really the majority of the year. And so I think we're more just sick of seeing the same exact technique all the time on live coverage and on YouTube videos. I'd say it's more monotonous than it is boring. And now we finally reached the point in the video where I'm gonna talk about the solutions to the forward-facing sonar problem, epidemic, whatever you wanna say. There's enough complaining, let's talk solutions, starting with tournament organizations. I think it's clear to see that we are in the wild west right now of forward-facing sonar setups. Brian Schmidt, a Bassmaster Elite Series angler, has 7 graphs, 7 fish finders on his boat, and something like 5 Livescope transducers. And most people would look at this and say, that's too much, we've gotta have limits. But my first point to begin the solutions section of this video is that more screens doesn't always equal more fish catching, because the last time I checked, Brian was in 63rd in Angler of the Year points. And so if electronics, if live scoping was really that big of an advantage, he, as the guy who has the most screens, would be winning everything. But just for the sake of argument, let's say that restrictions and regulations do need to happen on pro fishing circuits. What should those regulations be? The first regulation I've heard about maybe coming down the pipeline to pro circuits is a screen limit. Whether it's 48 inches or 54 inches, that is the total amount of inches of screens you can have on your boat, which is 48 is basically 4 12-inch screens, which comes out, if you're gonna go retail on, let's say, like 4 12-inch Garmins, that's like 10 grand at least. And I've also heard leagues talking about limiting forward-facing transducers to 1 per boat. And I can see the reasons behind those being like the first easy, logical regulations, but my biggest problem with them is that they don't actually solve anything. Dustin Connell is one of the best live scopers on the planet. He's won hundreds of thousands using that technology, and he only has 1 live scope transducer on his trolling motor and 1 12-inch graph he's looking at. And so really, if you are going to limit the transducers and limit the screen total, you are making the playing field easier for guys like him who have gotten good at using minimal, per se, technology. But oftentimes, perception is reality. And so if you're a fan of the sport and looking up at the pros, it seems like you need extravagant electronic setups to even enter tournaments. People who can't afford that are not going to enter the sport, and that is why, in my opinion, the sport of bass fishing, the tournament side, is on a decline right now, because the perception is the reality. And to be honest, that kind of makes me sad, because for the most part, these pros are not using all these screens and all these live scopes because they have to. They're doing it because they're sponsored and they can. So if you want to limit the transducers and the screen size to make the pro angler image more attainable to the younger viewer, go for it. Take away some transducers, take away some screen size. I just don't think you're gonna do anything with that, because they're still driving $80,000 trucks, most of them, and $100,000 boats. But you know, sure, go ahead, take some of the transducers and screens. I'm sure that'll do it. Now, one big change that I do think is gonna happen on both pro circuits is going to be having half the tournaments, or some level of the tournaments, be forward-facing sonar tournaments, as in you can use Livescope in those derbies, and the other half is going to be no forward-facing sonar tournaments. Now, personally, if you were to ask me for my solution if I ran a tour, I would say no regulations, no limitations. If you want to run 8 graphs and 6 live scopes, knock your lights out. You want to have a jet engine on your fishing boat to get into the shallowest of creeks and rivers? Absolutely, as long as it's safe, go for it. And for the love of everything good and holy, you can throw an Alabama rig if you want to. But the big caveat to all that is that if you as an electronics company want to be able to have your product used by pros on my tour, you have to make it very, very easy for the image we see on your screen to be displayed through our live cameras or into TV coverage. That way the viewers watching, the fans watching the sport, the competition, can actually learn from those pros as they are using forward-facing sonar. If you don't make that easy, and again, I will invest, again, this is me if I was a tournament organization, I will invest my own money into making that easy, but it's gotta be easy from your end as well. We've already seen Bassmaster and MLF do this a little bit with forward facing, but in my opinion, it needs to happen a whole lot more. My next solution is going to be for fisheries departments and states. I saw Wisconsin was possibly proposing a ban on forward facing, but honestly, it's gonna be real hard, in my opinion, to measure the true impact of forward-facing sonar and its effect on lakes. This is due to lakes being different from one another. Even lakes that are next to each other oftentimes are so different in terms of composition, water quality, that kind of stuff. And fish populations all the time in these bodies of water are going in waves of being healthy and unhealthy and having good spawns and bad spawns. And so I don't think you could select just like a short study in one lake specifically to test if forward-facing sonar is good or bad for fisheries. I think it's all anecdotal. But if state fisheries departments can prove that forward-facing is hurting our lakes, absolutely I'm in favor of banning it. But I think the counter argument to that, kind of logically, is that most of our lakes have too many bass in them anyways. Like, fisheries management is a crucial part of growing big bass. The state of Texas knows that best. That's why slot lakes exist, because a slot gives a fish the chance to grow into maturity. And so you have a whole lot of really good, healthy fish in a body of water, and oftentimes big ones as well. And that only happens when guys actually keep legal fish. And so, to be honest, if forward-facing sonar causes more fish to die, either from just catch and release, or they are caught in a tournament and then released after the tournament and there's a post-release mortality, it's probably good for our lakes that we lose a few fish. I'm sure there are caveats to that, maybe the Great Lakes and smallmouth, that kind of stuff, but for the most part, our lakes could definitely use a few fish culled out. Now, moving on to our next solution here, we have solutions for companies in the industry. And I wanna read pretty much off these notes here because I wanna be very careful with how I talk about this. I heard a rumor that many lure companies' sales are down big in 2023 and 2024, Zoom Bait Company specifically being the one that I've heard through the grapevine about their sales being down. But this, of course, extends to local mom and pop tackle shops and online retailers. And supposedly, anglers across the country aren't buying traditional lures like jigs and crankbaits and spinnerbaits anymore because forward-facing sonar techniques have become so popular. And so lure companies that don't sell or don't sell good versions of the jig head minnow part, so the jig head and the minnow and the soft plastic, they have been complaining that the anglers they sponsor can't compete using the products they make, because if you're an angler and you're trying to win, you're gonna go shake the minnow, and I'm sorry, a company that only makes craws and topwaters and jerkbaits, I'm not gonna use your product a whole lot because I can't compete using it. And so that's probably a true fact that's happening. Sales of regular lures are down because of Livescope. And my solution to this, to companies, would be that you guys have to reevaluate your marketing spend and stop spending money on promotional avenues, whether it's magazines or commercials or anglers or pro anglers that do not actually sell the products that you want to sell. Take Zoom, for example. By looking at their website, you can see a whole bunch of pro anglers they sponsor, many of which probably on a monetary, a cash basis. And I'm not gonna call any names off this list here, but for the vast majority of these guys, Zoom, let's be realistic here, are these guys selling any product for you? For the vast majority of these guys, I would bet my whole bank account they are not selling the product, at least the product you want them to sell. And so the solution, if y'all wanna get back to selling craws and worms and topwaters and flukes, you gotta let most of these guys go. I know there may be some history there, but if you're paying these guys any money, that is more than likely not making you any money in return. And so you need to work with anglers who actually fish with and promote your non-forward-facing sonar product, and that for the most part being influencers, especially bank and kayak focused ones. Now, I bet if companies complaining about not selling product anymore actually worked with people who can sell product, their balance sheets would be back in the green in no time. Now, the one pro, I'm gonna zoom in here on the Zoom website, that's probably worth their money right now is Randy Blockett, because he is fishing lures that are not forward-facing sonar based, and he has a whole social media to go along with it. So Randy, if you're watching this, you're doing the right thing by your sponsors. You're probably selling products that keep them in business. But a lot of companies are trying to rely on forward-facing sonar loving pros, and they're complaining about not selling product. y'all gotta work with different people that sell product. And I'm not saying this because I'm an influencer who's gonna benefit from this kind of marketing. I'm saying this because it's true. If you're a company, you gotta spend your money in wise places, and I'm not so sure if putting any cash at all towards professional fishing, unless they have some level of live scope and no live scope, is worth your money. My next solution is going to be towards you guys as individual anglers. Some of you like forward-facing sonar and some of you don't. And so I'm gonna talk to the guys that don't right now. If you don't wanna target individual fish in the water column, you don't wanna scope, you don't wanna look at the screen, that doesn't feel right to you, guess what? You don't have to use it. There are tons of fish left to catch, and especially as more and more guys get off the bank, it's kind of a hypothesis I have, but I think the fish on the bank are gonna become less pressured, easier to catch. And so maybe for you, just even using forward facing to line up your cast, to see the structure down there, to eliminate wasted time, maybe that totally gets rid of the love of the activity for you. And you know what? That is okay. That is your why. And so do not let comparison, as the quote goes, comparison is the thief of joy. Don't let other anglers using forward facing take away your love for fishing. Block it out of your mind, forget it even exists, and go back to having fun. And if you love forward-facing sonar, my advice to you would be learn more about fish and their behavior to become a better rounded angler. A lot of young anglers do have an incredible skill with forward-facing, but because they're so young, and I don't care how many YouTube videos or tournaments you watch on live coverage, there's still learning to be done when it comes to fish behavior. So put the scope away just for a little bit and learn more about fish behavior and seasons and colors and patterns. Then bring forward facing back in, and you're gonna become an even better angler. So that brings us back to the overall theme, the topic we've been discussing about forward facing, and that is the why. I enjoy catching bass. I wanna get a bite, I wanna reel them in, I wanna take a video and a picture and release them back in the water. To me, I will choose the mystery of the catch when I can. The topwater frog bite, I love it. Throwing a vibrating jig and a lipless crankbait and fishing in super deep water with a big worm or a football jig. I love the mystery of the catch there, and I promise you guys, I want to choose that every time that I can. But to me, if I know that fishing is tough and the water is cold and using forward-facing sonar is going to help me accomplish my why to get a bite and catch more fish, I would be dumb not to use it. I just want to catch fish by any means necessary, and that is my why. But that might not be your why, and my channel is still for you if that's the case. Because I create videos from the bank, from the kayak, from the bass boat with electronics on and electronics off, because I want every angler, every why, to better understand bass fishing and of course, catch more fish no matter why you fish. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and maybe for the first time, some of y'all have a different view now, a different light of forward-facing sonar, hopefully not a spotlight. Sorry, I had to bring that up again. Spotlighting is just a dumb comparison. It holds no water, whatever. Get off the internet, go catch some fish.